Martha Johnson spent the afternoon under the punishing Texas sun, patching fences with a steady rhythm of ranch life. The land stretched out before her, quiet and still, the kind of peaceful solitude that made her feel anchored, rooted. There was nothing like the serenity of working the land she had called home for nearly 30 years. She felt the weight of the sun on her shoulders, the dirt under her nails, and it all felt like a quiet blessing. Hard work, yet fulfilling, familiar. Her husband had passed away 10 years ago, and since then, Martha had been living alone. The silence didn't bother her anymore. She had made peace with the solitude, even embraced it. This was her land, and she was its keeper. But not everyone saw it that way. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. From a distance, the rumble of engines broke the peace. Martha didn't need to turn around and know what it was. She had heard the trucks before, and their presence always signaled something she dreaded. The arrival of trouble. She didn't flinch. Instead, she kept working, hammering the last nail on the fence post with the same precision she had perfected over the years. She knew what would come next, and she knew it would be hard. Carlos Vega and his cartel weren't the first to show up demanding land, and they wouldn't be the last. She had dealt with men like them before, men who thought they could intimidate a woman into submission. The trucks pulled up slowly, the dust trailing behind them like a dark cloud. Carlos Vega, dressed in an expensive button-down shirt, stepped out of the lead truck. He had a cold smirk on his face, the kind of smile you'd see from a man who believed he had all the power in the world. His men followed, swaggering, rifles slung low. They moved with the kind of arrogance that only comes from believing they were untouchable. One of the soldiers pushed past her, shoving her roughly on the shoulder as he walked toward the porch. He laughed loudly, as though to remind her who was in charge. But Martha didn't flinch. She had grown used to men like this. They came, they taunted, they threatened, and in the end, they always underestimated her. Carlos looked around, taking in the view. "Nice place," he said with mocking grin. "Shame to see it go to waste." Martha didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the fence she had been working on, hammering the final nail into place with careful precision. "I'm Carlos," he continued, stepping closer. "Carlos Vega. I'm here because this land's going to be ours now." Martha didn't look up at him. She knew exactly who he was. Carlos Vega wasn't just any cartel leader. He was the one who had been seizing land, running people out of their homes, buying a property with threats. People who stood in his way had a habit of disappearing. Martha knew that, too. But she also knew something else, that people like Carlos Vega were not used to being opposed. Not in the way she would oppose him. She raised a hammer and set it down slowly, wiping her brow. "This land is mine," she said, her voice calm and steady. Carlos chuckled, his men joining in. "Is that so?" He stepped closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can stop us? You're just an old woman. This place isn't worth the trouble anymore. You're going to have to leave, and if you don't, we'll make it difficult for you." Martha didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had heard this speech before, and it didn't scare her. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of her work, the steady beat of her heart. Carlos didn't like being ignored. He took another step forward, his tone sharpening. "You don't understand. We don't ask for permission. We take." Martha stood up and turned to face him, the wind ruffling her hair. Her eyes were calm, but there was a fire behind them that made Carlos hesitate. "I don't care who you are," she said quietly. "This land is mine, and I'll fight for it." Carlos looked at her, his smirk faltering for just a moment, before he laughed again, louder this time. "You think you can stop me? You're just one old woman with a piece of land. What are you going to do? Shoot me? You'd never make it." She didn't answer him right away. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned and walked back toward the house, stepping inside the door. Her fingers brushed the edge of the rifle hidden there, resting comfortably just out of sight. Carlos saw her movements, but he didn't understand. He thought she was giving up. He didn't realize she was preparing. "Don't get any ideas," Carlos said with a sneer. "You're out of your depth here." But Martha remained silent. She didn't need to explain herself. She knew the kind of man Carlos Vega was. She had fought men like him before, men who thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. But this time, the consequences were going to be different. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, when the sound of engines returned. This time, it wasn't just Carlos and his men. It was backup. 2 more trucks pulled up, and a dozen more men spilled onto her land, their heavy boots crushing the dry earth. Carlos led the charge, his confidence swelling now that he had more men to back him up. Martha stepped out onto the porch again, this time with her rifle in hand. The cool metal felt familiar, comforting. Her fingers wrapped around the grip, steady and unhurried. She had spent years training with weapons, honing her skills, perfecting the art of silent combat. Carlos saw the rifle and froze for a second, the smile fading from his face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice rising in anger. "Defending my home," Martha said, her voice calm, but with an edge to it that made Carlos hesitate. "You've already taken enough from this town. Now you're going to take from me?" Carlos took a step forward, raising his hands as if to calm her down. "You don't want to do this, lady. You don't want to make things harder for yourself." "You already made things hard," Martha said, taking another step toward him, her rifle raised but aimed low. "And you're going to regret it." He waved his men forward, and they began to fan out, spreading across the yard, positioning themselves in a way that gave them an advantage. They thought they had her outnumbered. They thought they had the upper hand. Carlos looked at Martha, his face twisted in a sneer. "You think you can win this? You think you're some kind of soldier?" Martha didn't answer him. She just stood there, watching him, waiting, and then she did something he didn't expect. She fired a shot, not at him, but near him, right into the dirt. The force would send a spray of dust into the air, and Carlos's men jumped back in surprise. "Move!" Carlos barked, but there was a hesitation in his voice now, a flicker of doubt. Martha lowered the rifle just a bit, but her eyes never left him. "You're going to walk off this land now, Carlos, and you'll tell your men to leave with you." Carlos's face twisted with rage, but there was something else there now, something he hadn't expected. Fear. Fear that maybe, just maybe, this old woman wasn't as helpless as he had thought. But Carlos wasn't the type to back down easily. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice now low, dangerous. "I don't think I will," Martha replied, her grip tightening around the rifle. The sound of her steady breathing was the only noise in the air now. The dust, the heat, the tension, it all hung heavy, and Martha knew it was time. The time to fight had come. Carlos's men hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The fear was spreading through the group, and they could see it on their faces. This wasn't just some defenseless old woman they were dealing with. She had power. She had purpose. And worst of all, she wasn't afraid of them. Carlos turned to his men, his voice commanding, "We're not leaving. Take her out. She's nothing but an old widow." But his words fell flat, and the hesitation in his men's movements told a different story. They had been trained for combat, yes, but this was something else. They weren't prepared for this kind of fight. They had come to take what was hers, to intimidate her, and instead, they found themselves facing a woman who was not easily intimidated. Martha didn't hesitate any longer. The rifle came up in one swift motion, and with steady hands, she took aim at one of the soldiers trying to move toward the barn. The shot rang out. It wasn't a kill shot. It was enough. The soldier collapsed to the ground, a sharp cry escaping his lips. His comrades froze, eyes wide in shock. Carlos, now visibly shaken, shouted orders again. "Get her! Take her down!" But it was too late. Martha was already moving, her feet light on the ground as she shifted positions, her rifle scanning the yard, the soldiers, one by one. Each shot she took was deliberate, precise. She wasn't wasting ammo. She was taking control of the situation. The cartel soldiers scrambled, tried to regroup, but they were disoriented. And as they tried to move, Martha's plan unfolded. Her traps were activated, her lines were cut. They were surrounded. Caught in a web they had no idea was coming. Martha's voice came over the quiet chaos. "I told you to leave. Now you'll have to face the consequences." The crack of the rifle echoed across the land, sending a ripple of fear through the cartel's men. They had thought this would be an easy job, a quick land grab, a bit of intimidation, and then off to the next. They had underestimated Martha, and now, in the confusion of the trap she had carefully set, the balance of power was shifting. Carlos stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief. One of his men was down, clutching his leg, and the rest of them were scrambling, trying to find cover, but there was nowhere to hide. Martha had anticipated their every move, and her traps had been placed in all the right spots. They were trapped in her web. The young soldier who had shoved Martha earlier looked around frantically. "We're surrounded," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "What do we do, Carlos?" Carlos Vega's confidence had been shaken. He quickly turned to the soldier, his voice low but laced with fury. "Get her now. We have to move quickly, or we lose everything." But his words rang hollow. His men weren't responding as they should. They were scared, and Carlos could see that. His bravado was slipping, and in its place was something more primal. Fear. Martha was no longer standing still, waiting. She was already moving, her steps deliberate and calculated. With each movement, she repositioned herself, keeping her rifle aimed, but she never fired unless it was absolutely necessary. She was playing a careful game, one she had learned over years of training and experience. Each shot, each move, was meant to disorient, to wear them down. Carlos had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. He had come here thinking she was just a widow, but what he didn't know was that Martha was far from ordinary. Her past, buried in the shadows of a life spent in special forces, had given her the skills and the mind to fight back against impossible odds. The wind kicked up, carrying dust and dirt into the air, but Martha remained unaffected. She stood tall, steady, her rifle pointed toward the next soldier who dared to move. The man, younger and more inexperienced than the rest, tried to make a break for it, hoping to get to the truck and drive off. But he never made it past the first few steps. A shot rang out, the bullet striking the ground just inches from his feet. He froze, eyes wide, the realization hitting him that escape wasn't an option. "You're not going anywhere," Martha called out, her voice steady, but with a hint of finality. The soldier raised his hands in surrender, his face pale. "Please, I don't want any trouble," he begged, his voice desperate. But it was too late. Martha had already made her decision. The cartel had made their move, and now they would pay for it. With one smooth motion, she brought the rifle up and took aim at the man's legs, disabling him without killing him. The sound of the rifle's report was followed by the soldier's scream, but Martha didn't flinch. She had made it clear this was her land, and anyone who tried to take it from her would face the consequences. Carlos's men were faltering now, and the fear was evident in their movements. They no longer fought with confidence. They fought to survive. They looked to Carlos for direction, but their leader's eyes were wild, his mind racing for a way out. "Carlos, we need to go," one of the men said, his voice tight with panic. "This isn't worth it. We're getting picked off one by one." But Carlos wouldn't listen. He couldn't afford to retreat now. Not in front of his men. Not after everything he had said. "We're not backing down," he growled. "Get her. We'll make her pay." The soldiers moved forward again, this time with more caution, but Martha was already one step ahead. She had them exactly where she wanted them, disorganized and desperate. As they moved toward the barn, they were met with another barrage of shots. The men scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find. But Martha had already anticipated their every move. The traps were set in the perfect places, and as one of Carlos's men darted toward a stack of hay bales, the ground beneath him gave way, and he fell into a pit she had dug earlier, a deep trench covered by a thin layer of dirt and leaves. The sound of his fall echoed through the yard, followed by the man's cry for help. He struggled to get out, but it was too late. The pit was deep, and he was stuck, unable to escape. Carlos saw the pitfall and realized just how far this had gone. His men were retreating one by one, losing their nerve. He looked back toward Martha, who was still standing tall on the porch, the rifle in her hands, unflinching. This time, he knew it wasn't a threat. It wasn't a woman who could be bullied or pushed around. This was a soldier, and she was in complete control. "Retreat," Carlos barked, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and fear. "Get in the trucks. We're leaving." But it was too late. His men were already pulling back, fleeing toward the vehicles, abandoning their mission and leaving Carlos behind. Martha lowered her rifle, watching as Carlos and his remaining men scrambled toward the trucks. She didn't need to chase them. They had already lost. The dust settled over the yard as the last of Carlos's men sped off, the sound of their engines fading into the night. Martha stood on the porch, watching them go. It was over for now, but she knew it wasn't the end. Not really. Tim Harper, the man who had helped her set the traps, approached cautiously. He had been stationed on the far side of the property, making sure everything was in place, and he had watched the entire confrontation unfold from his vantage point. "Well," Tim said, breaking the silence, "I think that went better than we expected." Martha didn't smile. Instead, she just nodded. "For now," she said quietly. "But they'll be back. They always come back." Tim's expression grew serious. "And next time we'll be ready. You've set the bar high, Martha. They won't make the same mistake again." Martha looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "They'll come harder next time. But I'll be ready. We'll be ready." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Martha stepped off the porch and walked toward the barn. Her land, was quiet again. For now, it was hers. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't just protecting her home. She was protecting everything she had fought for, everything she had built, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. As she stepped into the barn, the faintest glimmer of a plan began to take shape. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, tense, shocked, and finally satisfied when justice was served, let your voice be heard. Comment wherever you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Because together, we can keep rewriting the narrative one story at a time.